106 hostages, 4,000 kilometers of open airspace, one building they'd never set foot inside. They had the blueprints. 99 minutes on the ground, one soldier dead. The operation that every counterterrorism unit on Earth studied afterward wasn't remarkable because it succeeded. It was remarkable because of what had to be true before the first aircraft ever left Israeli airspace, and because of what it cost to get there. On June 27, 1976, Air France Flight 139 left Athens with 248 people aboard. Shortly after takeoff, 4 hijackers took control. 2 from the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine's External Operations Wing. 2 from the West German Revolutionary Cells. The plane refueled in Benghazi and continued south to Entebbe International Airport in Uganda, landing on June 28th, with the full cooperation of the Ugandan government. That cooperation is worth sitting with for a moment. Idi Amin wasn't a reluctant host who looked the other way. Uganda's president visited the hostages in person. He placed his own soldiers alongside the hijackers as additional guards. He delivered speeches about his diplomatic efforts to secure a peaceful resolution. The runway, the terminal building, the soldiers, the legitimizing cover of a functioning state, Amin provided all of it, while performing the role of mediator for the international press. Then the passengers were sorted. Non-Israeli, non-Jewish passengers were released over several days and flown out. By July 1st, 148 people had been freed. What remained were 94 Israeli and Jewish hostages, plus 12 Air France crew members who had been offered their freedom and declined. 106 people in the old terminal building, surrounded by 4 hijackers and an indeterminate number of Ugandan soldiers, 4,000 kilometers from Tel Aviv. The demands were specific: the release of 53 prisoners held across 5 countries, 40 inside Israel, 6 in West Germany, 5 in Kenya, 1 each in France and Switzerland. The original deadline was July 1st. It passed without a response. They moved it to July 4th. Israel had a stated policy of not negotiating with terrorists. The cabinet met. Then it met again. The clock kept moving and no decision came. If you've never seen this channel before, this is what we do. We take the operations that changed how countries fight, and we show you exactly what happened and why. Subscribe if that's what you're here for. Yitzhak Rabin had run Israeli military operations before. He commanded the IDF during the 1967 war and had a precise sense of the gap between a plan that looks achievable on paper and one that actually holds together under pressure 4,000 kilometers from home. A C-13. O Hercules, at maximum operational range, could reach Entebbe, but barely. Any mechanical problem, any navigational error, any intelligence gap on the ground, and the force would be stranded in East Africa with no extraction option and no backup within range. Rabin wasn't opposed to a military rescue on principle. He was opposed to one built on assumptions that hadn't been tested. Shimon Peres had a different read. The defense minister's argument was that capitulating to the demands would establish permanently that Israeli hostages were viable leverage, that any group willing to board a plane with weapons could extract concessions from Jerusalem. The two men weren't arguing about courage or risk tolerance in the abstract. They were arguing about which kind of failure the country could recover from. IDF Chief of Staff General Mordecai Mata Gur didn't wait for the cabinet to resolve it. He began authorized planning on the assumption that approval would come. The team had days. What made the plan possible was a construction company, Solel Bonnet, an Israeli firm, had built the old terminal at Entebbe. The original architectural drawings were in Israeli records. When the planners pulled them, they had the exact dimensions of every room where the hostages were being held. Door positions, corridor widths, the interior angles from which a guard standing against any given wall would or wouldn't have a clear sightline. When passengers released in earlier stages were debriefed in Paris and Tel Aviv, their accounts mapped directly onto those drawings. Guard positions, hijacker locations, the arrangement of hostages on the terminal floor, all of it confirmed against a blueprint that already existed. The assault unit was Sayeret Matkal, a special reconnaissance force operating under military intelligence rather than the conventional IDF chain of command. Its commander was Lieutenant Colonel Yonatan Netanyahu, 30 years old, whose reputation inside the IDF had been built on operations that couldn't be discussed publicly. His younger brother Benjamin was in Washington at the time, working as an Israeli diplomat. and learned what happened the same way the rest of the world did. Brigadier General Dan Shamran commanded the overall operation. Supporting elements came from the Sayeret Zanhanim paratroopers and the Golani Infantry Brigade, perimeter security and airfield control, while Sayeret Matkal handled the terminal itself. Shamran would go on to serve as IDF Chief of Staff from 1987 to 1991. But in July 1976, he was running the most complex long-range rescue operation any Western military had attempted. The aircraft package was 4 Lockheed C-130 Hercules transports and 2 Boeing 707s. One 707 flew as an airborne command post. The second didn't go to Entebbe. It landed at Nairobi's Wilson Airport in Kenya before the assault began, fitted out as a flying hospital with surgeons, nurses, and blood supplies on the ground and ready. Kenya's cooperation was covert. Nairobi denied it for years afterward. The route went south over the Red Sea, west across Ethiopia into Kenyan airspace, then north into Uganda. Low altitude for portions of the flight to stay off radar. No filed flight plan. Approximately 4,000 kilometers, 18 hours, almost no radio traffic the entire way. And then there was the Mercedes. The lead C-130 carried a black Mercedes-Benz limousine and 2 Land Rovers in its hold. The moment the aircraft stopped rolling, the vehicles would come off the ramp and form a convoy moving toward the terminal in the same configuration Idi Amin used for his presidential motorcade. Ugandan soldiers standing post in the dark, seeing headlights approaching in a formation they recognized, would hesitate before raising a challenge. That hesitation, measured in seconds, was the entire operational window. They were about to drive in a hostile country through a perimeter of armed soldiers, pretending to be the head of state who had given those soldiers their orders. The aircraft left Sharm el-Sheikh on the evening of July 3, 1976. The 4 C-130S and the Command 707 flew south without deviation. The first C-130 touched down at Entebbe at approximately 11 o'clock local time, lights off, taxiing slowly. The Mercedes and the Land Rovers came off the ramp. The convoy started moving toward the terminal. A Ugandan sentry challenged the motorcade before it reached the building. He was shot with a silenced weapon. Something, the sound or movement nearby, alerted a second guard. The window compressed. The assault team was already at speed. Sayeret Matkal went through the terminal doors. The assault took approximately 3 to 4 minutes. All 4 hijackers were killed. Netanyahu's soldiers moved through the building shouting in Hebrew, telling the hostages to stay down. 3 of them didn't make it. Pasco Cohen, Jean-Jacques Maimoni, and Ida Borochovich, caught in the exchange as the team swept through. 102 people were alive and moving toward the aircraft. While the terminal was being cleared, a separate IDF team crossed the military apron and destroyed 11 Ugandan MiG fighters parked on the flight line. Soviet-supplied aircraft that could have pursued the C-130s north over the lake once the force was airborne. They were gone before the transports were ready to leave. Yonatan Netanyahu was outside the terminal entrance, managing the movement of hostages toward the planes, when a round from a Ugandan position struck him. His men carried him onto the aircraft. He died before the C-130 landed in Nairobi. He was 30 years old and the only IDF soldier killed in the operation. The Israeli government later renamed the mission for him, from Operation Thunderball to Operation Yonatan. The last transport lifted off 99 minutes after the first one landed. The hostages flew to Nairobi, where the Hospital 707 was waiting, then on to Israel. They landed on July 4, 1976. We cover operations like this every week, the ones that changed how countries fight and the ones that showed exactly how they fail. If you're not subscribed yet, now is a good time. 102 of the 106 came home. 3 died in the terminal. The 4th was Dora Bloch, 75 years old, a British-Israeli dual national who had been taken to Mulago Hospital in Kampala 2 days before the raid after choking on food. She wasn't in the building when the assault began. She was in a hospital bed in the capital, under Ugandan guard, when Sayeret Matkal hit the terminal doors 60 kilometers away. After word reached Kampala, agents from Amin's State Research Bureau went to the hospital and murdered her. Her remains weren't recovered until 1979, after Tanzanian forces drove Amin from power. At the United Nations, Uganda and a group of African nations brought the raid to the Security Council. The argument was sovereignty. a foreign armed force had entered Ugandan territory without permission. The United States and most Western governments rejected that framing. Kurt Waldheim, the Secretary General, said he was troubled by the precedent while acknowledging the humanitarian context. No resolution passed. The military question moved on a different timeline. Charlie Beckwith had spent years arguing to the Pentagon that the U.S. Army needed something it didn't have, a unit built for the kind of precision, small force operation that conventional military structure wasn't designed to execute. The resistance inside the institution was real and persistent. Entebbe broke it. 16 months after the raid, the Army authorized 1st SFODD Delta Force was formally established in November 1977, with Beckwith in command. Before Delta Force had run a single operation, West Germany's GSG-9 demonstrated the same approach in Mogadishu, Somalia. The unit's commander, Ulrich Wegener, had studied Entebbe before October 1977, when a hijacked Lufthansa aircraft sat on a tarmac with 86 hostages aboard. GSG-9 went in. 7 minutes. Every hostage survived. 4 years after Entebbe, the United States attempted to rescue 52 American diplomats held in Tehran following the seizure of the U.S. Embassy in November 1979. Operation Eagle Claw launched in April 1980 with 8 helicopters. 2 broke down before reaching the desert staging point. A third was declared unfit on the ground. The mission required a minimum of 6 operational aircraft. With 5 remaining, the commander aborted. During the withdrawal, a helicopter and a C-130 collided. 8 Americans died without firing a shot at the enemy. The investigations ran for years. What they kept returning to wasn't the crews, they were trained and willing. It was the architecture underneath the operation, command authority divided between service branches that had never trained together as a single force. No contingency planning for losing aircraft along the way. A helicopter fleet assembled partly under political pressure. Beckwith said afterward that unified command and 6 months of preparation would have produced a different result. The mission he kept referencing, in testimony and in writing, was Entebbe, not because of geography or politics, but because it remained the clearest documented case of what a successful rescue actually required beneath the surface. Netanyahu didn't make it home, but the 102 people he went in to get did.